about them is that with him at the helm still, are they going to be able to repeat last season's success? I mean, they started out, I think it was 10-0 or 9-0. I mean, they had a halfway decent shot at 16-0. I didn't really believe they were going to, but they had a chance. Technically,
I don't think it's ever going to happen again.
I think it can.
It's one of those lightning.
It's a lightning in a bottle, so we probably won't see it again for 30 years. But I think it can happen again. Although if they add games, I don't think it'll happen again because they're talking about
which they're really talking about now.
They've been talking about it. So the next team in the division was the Indianapolis Colts, which
obviously
the big news.
A couple of huge stories. I was going to say,
Dungy is gone and has been replaced by Jim Caldwell, and even also don't forget who is it? Their his name? Their offensive coordinator retired as well.
Yeah.
But that was more of a he had to retire then to get pension, or he wasn't going to get it. So
and then of course on the field they lost Marvin Harrison.
Yeah, which he wasn't that good last year anyway, and he's got some off the field issues going on right now. So I'm not sure I would want him.
Yeah. The interesting thing I really did want to say, and I thought about this morning driving here. The one thing I did want to say about the Colts that I think was very dignified in a way, and I just really liked the way they did it, was that they had a successor planned several years in advance,
right.
And I just feel like on two fronts of this. One, very good for Jim Caldwell for he worked his butt off in that organization, and you know what they said to him, you know what, we're going to give this to you when he retires. We don't know when, but he worked hard, he stuck with it, and now it's paid off. And on the other hand,
we'll see if it pays off. Well, if the team starts to do poorly, they're going to get rid of him.
It's paid off in the sense that he was rewarded with at least a chance at the head coaching
He's gotten
job.
a promotion, but in promotion in the NFL could be a long time or no time whatsoever.
And then on the other hand, I think it's very, with just some of the crazy, like we've interviewed 8 coaches, who's going to get it, It was just kind of like, Tony Dungy, I've decided I've retired, and it was just okay, he's retired, so we know who the coach is now. You don't see that very often.
Right.
In fact, this is another thing I did want to bring up, was you really don't see it that often in any sport where it's like, we know 18 months in advance this is the successor, and I really like the way they did it. And if I was in charge of a team, I would probably do it that way.
And that was actually one of a couple teams this offseason that did that too. Another one being Seattle, but we'll talk about them.
I don't think I knew that. We'll get there.
Yeah.
We'll get there. That would be it's going to be a while.
Yeah,
those will be the last ones.
Yeah, well then I'll say it real quick. It was Mike Holmgren was set to retire at the end of the season, and Jim Moore Jr. was the successor.
I guess I didn't know that.
Yeah, because he had been there coaching the secondary. Also, like to point out that they drafted a running back in the first round, which I think is fascinating because I remember a couple years ago everybody loved Joseph Adai, the running back. Now apparently this is extra help for Adai, or in addition to Adai. So
and because we talked, I'm so sorry. I was just gonna say we talked about how I don't know if we actually talked about it on the show, but we talked about how the days of the pretty much straight up primary running back just seem to be over.
Right.
It seems to be very running back by committee now.
You have to at this point, and that's that's okay.
Yeah.
I think it's just Adai has been okay. He hasn't been great, and it's almost wondering if they're getting ready to pull the plug on him.
Yeah.
But that's just my inference. Doesn't mean anything. Also, a guy that I've heard talked about in terms of potentially having a big year this year because of Marvin Harrison leaving is Anthony Gonzalez. He's like a third-year receiver they drafted in the first round a couple years ago. And apparently he's going to get a lot more playing time now. So there's that to keep an eye on. The next team at 8-8 was
the Houston
Texans, which the big news for them, so to speak, was that they actually traded their backup quarterback, who some could argue should have been the starter, to the Vikings. So now they basically said, Matt Schaub, you are going to take us to the promised land, or we're going to sink with you. Other than that, though, the team is relatively the
very,
same.
very quiet offseason.
Very quiet offseason, the same. They had
as far as that goes, you
go either way.
You finished 8-8. I mean, you should have done something, but anyway.
Well, this is a very young team, and if the young guys they've been putting in place the last 3 to 4 years start to really step up their games, this will be a great team. We've already seen it with Mario Williams and Andre Johnson and Steve Slayton.
Mario Williams has every bit seemed worth the pick.
Right, and I just named rolled off 4 guys that were draft picks or whatever from the last few years that are excellent players. And in addition to them, you have like Amobi Okoye, I believe his name is, who was a guy they drafted in the '08 draft at 19. He was a very young guy coming out of the draft. So now he's 21. In a couple of years, I mean, he hasn't peaked yet as far as like physically and all that. So I mean, there's a potential for a lot of improvement on this team.
Definitely.
And
then the last team, the Jacksonville Jags,
which I think in a lot of people's eyes was one of the most disappointing teams of 2008. They didn't really have much in terms of personnel they changed, but the big news, two big news, they let Fred Taylor walk, or they released him, I think it was. So Maurice Jones-Drew is the guy now for sure. And two, they drafted 2 tackles in the first round in consecutive picks in the top 10 in this year's draft. And this was a team who had major problems with the offensive line last year. So there's the potential for a lot of increasement.
Yep.
Supposedly, a lot of increasement. I don't think that's a word.
I was just gonna say I don't think it's a word. Improvement.
Improvement. Yeah. I
think that's what you meant to say.
They can get better. Let's put it that way. Nah. Everyone makes mistakes, I guess. So, as always, we're going to pick favorite, we're going to pick a dark horse, a cellar dweller, which is the team with the worst record, a most valuable player, and a least valuable player. So, Chris, who is your favorite to win the division?
My favorite, I just feel like they're the favorite every year. And the reason I didn't pick the Titans, despite the best record in the NFL last year, well, I'll explain that later. But my favorite is the Colts.
I think that the favorite is the Colts as well. And I picked the favorite not so much over who my personal favorite is, but who I think it will be seen as the favorite or has to be considered by the favorite.
And it's the Colts.
And it's the Colts. And because the Titans, I mean, basically everybody was prepared for them to fail last year. They did eventually. They didn't. I mean, the playoffs, they were one and done in the first round. They played. They've only gotten worse on defense. They have not improved on offense. I mean, there's unfortunately a lot that one can say is going bad for them.
Going bad for them, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas the Colts are still generally the same team. That being said, the Colts looked pretty terrible at times last year and ended up like 10-6, so or wherever it was. It might even be better than that. So,
I think they were 10-6.
Yeah, I think so too. No, sorry, 12-4.
Oh, they were?
They were 12-4 last year, but they had a lot of games. They had a really easy schedule last year.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of games that were like really close that they squeaked out. So there's
like the one against the Patriots.
Yeah. So there's definitely I mean, I think there's a lot for people to see and people will see to pick them as the division winner. Who's your dark horse?
Okay, my dark horse is the Houston Texans.
I think so too. I agree with that.
And we've pretty much said kind of why.
Yeah, I don't think Tennessee has enough in them this year. I think they're just going to get worse. Jacksonville, I think, is going to have to start rebuilding here soon. Otherwise, Houston is a very young team. Yep. And they have a lot of potential.
And because of what you just said, the Jags are my cellar dweller.
Same here. I think, I mean, these are, and again, I think these are all conventions to me. Like, these are what everybody's going to probably agree on.
Yeah, and it's just crazy that, 2 or 3 years ago, they had that stretch of a bunch of wild cards and 10-6s and 11-5 years.
They were really good for a while, but they traded away a couple years ago their monster defensive tackle, and their defensive line was their strength on defense. And they lost Fred Taylor now, and now they don't have much of an offensive line, and it's going to come to the point. But by the time they fix the offensive line or the defensive line again, they're going to have to address everything else, and it's just cyclical. It's going to come back around. Okay, who's your most valuable player?
Okay, my most valuable player is it was close. But I picked kind of like you did on Friday. I picked Peyton Manning, and I think that, and I wanted to pick Jim Caldwell, but I think that Peyton Manning has had to step up a little bit, and I've seen just some off-season things with him, and I think that he's going to have a big year. I think that he is going to have a big year.
Well, I also picked Peyton Manning, and here's why, and it's very simple, straightforward. There's a few things that are almost pretty much near certainties in football. Brady's going to be good. The Patriots are going to probably have a decent record. LaDainian Tomlinson's going to rush for 1,000 yards.